Boatworks Today is sponsored by Total Boat and Alexial Yacht Coatings, as well as supported by the generosity from the beautiful folks over on Patreon. Thank you so much.
So welcome back to the shop, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Now, before I get started, I just want to give a huge thank you for all of the comments and specifically all of the emails that I got last week offering, tips and tricks, suggestions on where I can source the parts that I was looking for, best ways to route the lines from the fuel tank back to the engines, where to, things to keep in consideration for putting like the water fuel separators and all that stuff. Very, very, very helpful. I'm not gonna lie, it kind of made me feel a little bit stupid because a lot of the parts that I was looking for, specifically like the low profile fittings for this tank here, I was not able to find them. I mean, I spent a lot of time on the internet and I wasn't coming across anything that was gonna work. And come to find out, all the parts that I was looking for are readily available if you know where to look. And well, evidently several people had pointed that out. So again, I just want to give a huge thank you for that. Very much appreciated. So real quick, I want to go through some of the questions and concerns that came up several times last week. And the first one being, well, what size tank is this? Because it looks a little small. Now, at least according to the sticker on this is an 80-gallon tank. And kind of the general rule, I guess, at least, what was told to me is that as far as capacity, you want to have roughly about a half gallon of fuel for every horsepower that or engine that you're going to be running. Now, on this boat, I'm going to be running twin Honda 130s, and these were engines that I picked up, and I'm probably close to 8, 9, ish years ago from the St. Louis County Sheriff's Department. So they have been very well maintained by my old shop neighbor Paul since day one. He's the one that installed them. He maintained them every year, so I know they're in solid condition. Now, as far as, this gallon capacity, the 80 gallons, I think for the most part, the way that I would be running it, I'm going to be putzing around on Lake Superior, maybe occasionally bring it into like a larger inland lake. So at least for the way that I'd be using the boat, I think 80 gallons would probably be adequate. But that's not to say that, plans may not change, 5, 10, 15 years down the road. I might find myself in a position where I'm going to haul it down south and try and do a 20, 30 mile offshore fishing trip. I don't know, but I guess at this point, I do kind of agree that 80 gallons on twin outboards might be a little bit small in the long run, but at least for right now, that's kind of where things at. Now, the other question was, what is this tank made out of? And this is a fiberglass tank. Now, I'm going to touch more on this here in a little bit because I know that traditionally fiberglass tanks, at least the original fiberglass tanks, did not play well with the current fuel, specifically the fuel that contains ethanol. The original tanks were built with polyester resin, and long story short, what ended up happening is the ethanol would break down the resin, and then it kind of created this like gummy mess inside the tank that got sucked up through the lines and then followed up to your engines. It made a hell of a mess. So, but again, like I said, I'm gonna touch more on that here in a little bit. Now, the last thing, again, I'm just kind of blowing through these real quick here, as far as how would the tank, whether it's this tank or another one, how would it be mounted? Well, so in this well where the tanks are going to live, there is a false floor here. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I did cut this false floor out with the hope that I might be able to gain a couple of inches, one at least, where I could lower the tank a little bit more, which would have made getting the fittings for the fuel lines a little bit easier to source. But I cut that out and it didn't make a bit of difference. At most, I was going to be able to gain maybe another 1/4 inch of drop. So not enough to screw around with, to be perfectly honest. And as I come to find out, I can get the fittings that I need without having to do any screwing around with that anyways. So win-win. But what that did allow me to do is get a visual inspection on the center stringer, or I guess the backbone on the hull here, which was probably a good thing to do, just to make sure a problem didn't get buried and just, ignored. But I did get that false floor cut out, and I went through, I did a tap test. Visually, it looks great. And I put the moisture meter on it, and we're bone dry. So, that's one less thing to worry about, I guess, which is good. So that in and of itself was worth cutting the floor out, but now I'm going to have to glass it back in. All right, so getting back to this tank, does it make sense to keep moving forward with something like this, or does it make a lot more sense in the long run to maybe switch gears and kind of take a little bit different direction? So whenever I'm in a situation like this, I always break it down into pros and cons. And I'm going to be honest, I was having a hard time coming up with some pros with sticking with this tank, other than one glaring obvious thing, which is that I already have it. It isn't going to be an additional expense. That's all I could come up with. Right? It is a big one. I don't know exactly what a new tank would cost if I were to go with a different type of material like aluminum, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was somewhere around $1,500, maybe even $2,000, give or take. So anyways, so that's a pretty big pro, but it's only one. Now, as far as when you're looking at the cons, there's quite a few. And I guess the elephant in the room is that this is a fiberglass tank that has been built with resin. Now the sticker on here says that it is ethanol resistant, not ethanol proof. You know, I don't know. I mean, the issue with the original tanks, you know, way back when, is that they were built with polyester resin. I think I may have already touched on this, but the ethanol in today's fuel, it broke down that polyester resin and it just created a whole host of problems. Now, supposedly this was built with either vinyl or epoxy. I'm not sure which one, but it was one of those two materials, which my understanding is it does hold up a lot better to ethanol, but I don't know that it makes it ethanol proof like some of the other options that are available out there. And I guess, you know, kind of keeping that in mind, I see the fact that, you know, because this is a fiberglass tank, this, even if it's truly not, in most people's heads, if I, for whatever reason, were to decide to sell this boat, that's going to be a little bit of a liability. Whether it's justified or not, I guess is somewhat irrelevant. But if someone hears that it's a fiberglass tank, they're going to say, "Oh, I've heard all these horror stories. I don't want to go that direction. You know, we're going to have to either walk away or we're going to have to heavily negotiate things because we're going to have to put in a whole new fuel tank." Again, whether that's accurate or not, I don't know, but kind of going into it, at least with where I'm at as far as this project here, I could switch gears, you know, pretty easily and replace this with another option. I'm leaning in that direction just to avoid the whole liability issue, because I don't know what the future of this boat's going to look like 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road. Whatever I'm doing on it now, I want to make sure I kind of want to future-proof it for anything that may be coming up outside of my ownership. So that's kind of the direction that I'm leaning. But again, I haven't decided anything. I've got to make some phone calls and kind of see if the numbers actually make sense. Now, taking that a little bit further, there are some additional advantages to switching completely different materials. This tank at 80 gallons is a beast. I wouldn't be surprised if this weighs close to 300 pounds. It is very, very difficult for one person to kind of scoot it around and get it into position. Now, you weigh that out against, say, like an aluminum tank. Even if you were to go with, say, like 1/4 inch thick aluminum, you know, walls, or, you know, on the tank and the baffles and stuff, it would still end up being considerably lighter than this. And weight on this particular boat is an issue. So the weight considerations on this boat is that the water line, when it's, its resting water line is very, very close to the actual level of the scuppers. So anything that can be done to minimize or reduce weight is just going to allow the boat to float a little bit higher. It just gives you a little bit less of a pucker factor, you know, if you were to, you know, tie it up in the marina and leave for a day or a week or whatever. My understanding is right now, that water line is within maybe an inch of the actual height of the scuppers. So if I could go with a material or a tank that's going to, you know, cut that down by, you know, a fair amount, that would be a good thing. The other thing to consider too is that if I were to go with an aluminum tank, I could increase the capacity. You know, they kind of addressed one of the concerns that came up already, was that, you know, 80 gallons is a little bit small. Well, let's just kind of, you know, work this one backwards here. So let's just say, just to kind of keep numbers simple, that this tank weighs around 300 pounds. Now, fuel or gasoline weighs roughly 6 pounds per gallon. So for that weight difference between an aluminum tank and here, I could gain an extra 30, 40-ish gallons of fuel without adding any more additional weight to the overall picture here. So that's also something to kind of keep in mind. Now, going down that path of, you know, trying to minimize as much weight on here as I can, there was one thing that was done that I potentially could make a pretty significant difference here. Now, originally this boat came with twin inboards, and from what I was able to gather online, the weight of those two engines, depending on the size of the engine, was anywhere from, say, I think it was like 1,600 pounds up to 2,200 pounds. Now, that compared to the two outboards that I'm looking at, the Honda 130s, each of those outboards alone is around 500 pounds. So 1,000 pounds for that versus, let's just say 2,000 pounds that were here for the inboard. So theoretically, there's, 800 to 1,000-ish pounds that's already been removed just by taking out these inboards and doing the conversion to twin outboards on the Armstrong bracket. The one caveat there is that that 1,000 pounds from the outboard, that's going to be hanging almost 3 feet further back off the transom versus the original inboards. They were pretty much centered right in the beamiest part of the boat, giving the most displacement. So I'm going to be really curious to see kind of how that weight transfer actually translates, but I won't be able to take a look at that until springtime. We still got 3 feet of snow outside. And one of the design features of the Armstrong bracket is that it has a sealed flotation chamber, kind of built into the overall platform. Now, the way that I understand this is that the size of that flotation chamber was sized to offset the weight of one of the two outboards that would be hanging off there. Now, this bracket was originally designed for twin 250s, not 130s. I don't know if there's a significant weight difference between 130 and 250. At least it's not going to be, 1,000-pound difference. It may be an extra couple of 100 pounds, but I don't think it's going to be enough to really move the needle a whole lot. Now, if all goes well, I'm hoping that between the 1,000 pounds less of engine weight and the flotation that's built into the Armstrong bracket, that's going to help to keep things at a good level. And what I'd like to be able to see is to have at least a couple inches, at least, where the scuppers are above the waterline. But as far as where the floating waterline is on here, I guess I may have seen it, but I never really paid attention. If anybody has experience with this, either personally or someone that they know has one of these boats, if you would be able to verify, just kind of give me an idea of kind of where the actual true waterline is on these B25s, that would be very helpful. Then that can kind of also help me figure out location for like the battery banks and all sort of stuff. I mean, I want to try and keep the weight as far forward as I can, but I don't want it to go, bow down, because the boat still has to be able to naturally drain. But on the other hand, I don't want it sitting up like this and, kind of turning into a submarine. That would be bad. So for right now, I guess the first thing I got to do is I got to get a hold of some fabricators and get some actual numbers here, see what I'm truly looking at. As much as I don't want to, spend the extra money for a new tank, then I don't know what the hell I'd do with this one. But in the long run, I think it would probably be the wise thing to do. Now, the first person I'm going to contact, it's someone that indirectly I've already done work with, I guess, several times over the past years. He's a fabricator. He's up on the North Shore of Minnesota, maybe like 4 hours from here. So, I mean, it's certainly within distance for a day trip. But I need to get a hold of him, one, to see how his schedule looks. He's very, very, very good, which means he's also always very, very busy. Now, for me, the completion date that I'm shooting for is I want to be able to have this thing in the water for 4th of July weekend. It may or may not be completely finished, but I want it to be at least functional by that point. So I need to talk with him, see how his timeline looks, what kind of pricing I'm able to get on this, just to see if any of this makes sense. I mean, if it comes in, I don't think it would be, but if it comes in where a new tank is going to be like $3,000-4,000, I may just find a way to make old Glassy over here work and just kind of deal with it. But I don't think that's the case. But again, it's one of those things I don't know until I know. So that's what's going to be coming up here in this coming week. Reach out to Eric. And then there's a couple others that folks have recommended down around Florida area. So I'll get a hold of them and just try to get a feel for what it is that I'm going to be looking at out-of-pocket costs. So yeah, there's that. Oh, I will say this, if I can work out something with the guy up on the North Shore of Minnesota here, what I thought would be cool, if he's open to this, would be to, while he's actually doing the fabrication, take a road trip, spend a weekend or a week up there, and just kind of record the process of that fabrication. Again, I don't know if that's something he would be open to. Worst case, if he says, no, absolutely not, I'm not comfortable with that, worst case, I'll be able to at least grab the tank and bring it home with me and save up on the freight charges. So there's that. Either way, it's a win. It's just whether it's a a win-win. So at least for now, I have a tentative path forward here. I know that some of the details are going to change and evolve as we get a little bit further along in the project, but at least for now, I've got the first few steps mapped out, and at this point, it's just a matter of diving in and getting it done. So sounds like boot camp is going to start next week. So at that, I think right here is going to be kind of a natural breaking point for this week's video, and then next week, time to start the Itchy Scratchy Show. So as always, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you found it interesting. And if you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Thank you in advance. Greatly appreciate it. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, feel free to leave those down below. I will do my best to follow up with you. And as always, I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you in the next video.
This has been a Boatworks Today production.